Hello and welcome to Saturday Service, a podcast all about faith and football with me, Graham Boozy, in association with the Live Streams Churches here in Southend-on-Sea, England. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the West Ham United chaplain, Mr. Philip Wright. How are you keeping? Thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So just to begin with, would you mind just giving us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Reverend Philip Wright. I'm from Rush Green originally in Dagenham, which is, when I was growing up in the 80s, was the posh end of Dagenham and the rough end of Romford. It's changed a lot since then, but I grew up a stone's throw away from where the first team now train. My full-time job is I'm the lead chaplain for the Bark in Havering and Redbridge Hospital Trust. So that's Queen's Hospital in Romford and King George in Ilford. So I run chaplaincy and bereavement services for them. I got ordained in the Church of England back in 2014. I've always worked in hospital chaplaincy, but before that, actually, I was a youth worker, and I trained as a youth worker when I left school and worked for the YMCA for many, many, many years. Ended up running the hostel and the housing section of Romford YMCA at Romeo Corner in Romford until 2006, and then I went into chaplaincy the following year. I'm a West Ham fan through and through. I bleed claret and blue. Always have done. My family, you're born into it, aren't you? Into your football team. I was asked several years ago, actually, the last season at Upton Park, I was asked if I'd become the academy chaplain, and it developed from there.
If you could take me back to your early days in Rush Green, I'm always really interested in the origins of people's interest in football. And obviously, the location where you are, right next to the training ground, was quite unique. What's like your earliest memory where you thought, "Oh, this football thing's a bit of me. I like this."
Yeah, well, the training ground wasn't at Rush Green in those days. That was Full Sports Social Club. And funny enough, from the age of about 7 to about 12, I did judo at Full Sports Club. So I knew the building and I knew the ground. Yeah, all I can remember really is West Ham. My dad was a West Ham fan. My dad was actually quite a good football player. I was rubbish at football. I tried several teams as a youngster, fouled most of them. I think I stayed with one club for about a season and a half, and it wasn't. It must have skipped a generation because it didn't. I didn't follow in my father's footsteps. But my dad was West Ham, and my earliest memory is probably in the '70s Cup final, being there. But the real memory, I suppose, was 1980 and watching that Cup final with my dad and some of his friends. I was 11 at the time. And everyone in my junior school, Rush Green Junior School, most were West Ham fans. We had a few Liverpool, but most of them were West Ham, and that's all I've ever known, really. To be honest with you, I can't think of any reason why I'd go anywhere else other than West Ham. It was always in my family's history.
And was there a particular player in those early days that
Oh yeah,
you
definitely. Oh
loved?
yeah, Brooklyn. Without that shadow of a doubt, Trevor Brooklyn. He was my hero. Brooklyn and Bonds. They came to. I went to Rush Green Junior School and Robert Clack Senior School in Dagenham, and there for some reason there was some event, and both of those turned up, and it was the equivalent of Take That turning up in, I suppose, these days. It was fantastic. Yeah, Trevor Brooking. And in those days, I mean, I can remember from the age of about 11 going over to Chadwell Heath on my bike, cycling from Rush Green to Chadwell Heath at the age of 11 to go and get their autographs. And there was no security. I remember going on my chopper and, going through the gate to the car park and then sitting on the side of the training field watching them train. It was incredible in what you could do in those days. Yeah, so Trevor Brooking, Billy Bonds, that 80s team is the team that I would remember as my childhood team.
I guess we can move on to how that role came about at West Ham, because it seems like quite the privilege to be able to marry two things that you're incredibly passionate about.
So yeah. So before that, let me just say a little bit about how I became a Christian, really, because that wasn't that I've not always been a Christian, and the thought of being ordained and becoming a priest in the Church of England was the furthest thing from my mind completely. I grew up in what you would call a traditional Christian household. Nobody went to church, but they would call themselves Christian on paper. But for some strange reason, my mum taught me to say the Lord's Prayer before going to sleep every night for some reason. I don't know why, but I grew up doing that. And then at the age of 16, I had a bit of a spiritual experience at a Christian festival, which just blew me away. And that was the start of a journey of me discovering faith and God and what that means to me. In terms of West Ham have had 3 chaplains. 4 if you include Jane in the women's team, but 3 in the first team. The first chaplain was Elwyn Cockett, as far as I'm aware. And Elwyn Cockett was there at the time of Redknapp and around that era. And he was doing really well. He did a great job there as chaplain. I got to meet him a few times. He was a vicar in Billericay, doing that as sort of like a voluntary hobby, really, more than anything. And he was there for quite a few years, and really established the role of the chaplaincy within the club. And then he became the archdeacon of the area, West Ham, and his job became a bit too much for him in the sense of managing that and West Ham. So then he sort of took on board a sidekick, as you were, a guy called Reverend Alan Boulding, and he became sort of like an assistant chaplain. And then eventually Elwyn retired from it, and Alan took over the club as the club chaplain. And it was Alan that, whenever the last season at Upton Park was, he asked her if he could see me after the Arsenal game. It was a lunchtime kickoff, and we beat Arsenal. It was the last time we played them at home at Upton Park. And I met up with him after in the stadium, and he said, "I'd like you to become the academy chaplain if you can, to help me out." He said, "I've got too much on and I can't do everything." So for a West Ham fan, I bit his arm off, and jumped at the chance. And so I spent quite a few years at the academy. And then about 3 years ago, Alan sort of hung his collar up, as it were, and then sadly died about a year later. But he hung his collar up, and I became the main club chaplain.
So one of the things you previously mentioned online, which I found really interesting, was you said you don't bring God to a specific place. God is already there, and you are the conduit with which to get that message across, which I love because I've often always thought about these roles as bringing God into people's lives. How does that sort of mindset influence your work?
Well, it's the same in hospital chaplaincy, which is like my full-time job, really. It's the same. I don't take God into the hospital. God's already there at the bedside. I think it's quite a naive thought to think that you're bringing God into a situation, and quite arrogant to think that. God's bigger than that. He's already there around people's lives, and it's about opening doors for them to realise that the patient, whether it's patients or whether in the club it's players, staff, could be anybody, supporters. I'm doing quite a lot of work with supporters, actually. So it's about allowing those opportunities and making God real as well. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I find the biggest challenge, and the thing that I probably am the most passionate about, really, is making God accessible. God's already there. God doesn't arrive in the car with me. He doesn't arrive in the car on Sunday morning at church. God's already there. It's about how we tap into it, and how we tap into Him, and how we allow His Spirit or Holy Spirit to be around us, and use that.
And could you give us a brief overview as to what the role actually entails on the ground?
Yeah. So basically, it's anything spiritual, pastoral, or religious care for anybody involved in the club. So to say the biggest part, I mean, it's 95% pastoral and spiritual care. And the way that I describe that to people is good spiritual and pastoral care is finding out to people what is important to them, and through those things, making some sense and meaning of that person's journey. So in my daily work setting in a hospital, a good example of spiritual and pastoral care is that I might be working with an elderly person that's been told they've got 3 months to live. And everyone's focusing on the 3 months. Is the person going to stay in hospital? Are they going to go to a hospice? Are they going to go home? What medication they're going to be on? But the one thing that's worrying them about more than anything else is who's going to look after the dog when they die, because that's their lifeline. So it's getting alongside people. And in a football sense, it could be, I mean, it's the same principle. It could be a top player earning a fortune, but at the back of your mind is that your grandfather's dying of cancer, and that's the thing that's worrying you the whole time. So the job of the chaplain really is to get alongside people and journey with them from a spiritual and pastoral context. Now, the religious care comes in. I always describe religious care as it says what it does on the tin, really. Religious care is the rituals that go with someone's faith. So we've got quite a lot of Muslim players. So they have Friday prayers. So we have an imam that comes in on a Friday lunchtime, Khalil, who's a great guy, and so that will be the religious ritual that goes along with their faith. For a lot of Christians, it could be reading the Bible, praying, receiving communion, etc. So that's the religion, and that's a smaller part of what I do. In terms of the football club, the most of the religious care really is either saying a prayer with some people, either with them, or I'll say to them, "Do you want me to say a prayer back in the chapel when I go back to work, etc." Or it might be doing things like remembrance services. That might be for the academy, might be for the first team. Things like I did the ashes of David Gold, and I did the blessing over the ashes of a tree at the training ground for David Gold. So there are religious events and festivals that I get involved in with the club. But the biggest part of what I do is spiritual and pastoral care. And that's literally just hand holding and walking alongside people, and having banter, taking the banter with them, and being someone that they can just turn to and talk about life, especially outside of football.
And how do you sort of split your time? Are you at the London Stadium, for example, on match days, or
Yes and no. So, because the hospital was round the corner to the training, both training grounds, Chadwell Heath and Rush Green, I tend to go to those grounds on a Friday. So I'll go into the hospital and then I'll drive to Rush Green training ground, spend a few hours there, probably drive over to the academy and spend a couple of hours there with the staff and the players and stuff. I go to the stadium during the week sometimes, especially if I've got a meeting there. And the rest of the time, it's as and when needed. So it might be like this morning, for example, I had to go and meet an ex-player, a bit of a legend, an ex-player whose mum sadly passed away, and I'm taking the funeral. So I went to his house this morning. I met with his family. So I go as and when I'm needed a lot of the time. In terms of match days, I've got my own season ticket, which I've had since we've been in the new stadium. I don't get that from the club. I buy my own season ticket, and I tend to go and sit with my mates. But I do things at the match day as and when I'm needed. I'm not there generally unless I'm asked to be there. But that's becoming more often. The previous chaplain used to go on match days. But after COVID, the world changed, and it's about, do I need to be there? Do I not need to be there? And the club were quite, well, if you don't need to be here, there's enough people around as it is trying that we have to manage. We don't need you as well, unless there's a specific event that happens. But I am doing more and more with fans, I have to say, which is really exciting. I meet with the supporter services part of the club. I meet with them every 6 to 8 weeks. And if anybody writes into the club, emails in or telephones in to say, like, my dad's been diagnosed with this, or we've just lost my granddad or my mum or my wife, can West Ham do anything? That they always offer my services and say they would like the club chaplain to contact you. And many do. So that's starting to happen more and more. So that's another part of the religious side, which comes out of the pastoral side.
yeah? Because you mentioned in your article on the diocese website about the Foundry, for example, and the excitement you had about that opening. And yeah, I was just wondering, do you see a change in willingness from supporters to engage with you at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of a novelty. I think there's some supporters will think, oh, no, West Ham chaplain. I get asked to go and do talks with various supporter groups like Any Old Irons. There's another one whose name I can't remember the name of the actual group. It came out of Any Old Irons, based in Hornchurch. So I have those great. It's such a privilege, Graham, to do it. To be able to sit there with legendary players and be hosted by Tony Gale, who's a character in himself, is an honour. And I often, my role there is to go and talk about what the role of the chaplain is. So yeah, people are definitely, there's an openness and a willingness to it. There's an openness and willingness in the club, I have to say, within the first team club, the management, the coaching staff. I mean, I know Nuno's coaching staff extremely well because they were at the academy, they were at the 21s before they went to the first team. So Potsy, Robbo, Billy Lapine, Gerard, I know all those coaches extremely well. And they've supported them throughout, their work, but also in their private lives. I've supported them in one way or another. And that's so there is definitely an openness and willingness. And an example of that, funny enough, is actually quite recently. The club asked me, they'd never done this before. They have a 45-minute education session for the first team every couple of months or so. And it's usually on some sort of life skill or something to do with players retiring or something like that. And it's for the whole first team and they have to go to it. And they asked me to do one on religion, spiritual pastoral care, religious care, and also my role as a chaplain. So for them to ask me to do that and have access to the whole of the first team was incredible, really. So they do see the benefit and understanding of chaplaincy.
Because that's a really unique part of the role as well, isn't it? And obviously there's a lot of jobs where there's lots of interactions, but you're very much integrated into the players and the lives of everyone at the club by officiating, like you say, life events of some description. And I imagine that very special, but it's quite a responsibility as well.
Yeah, I don't take it lightly. I'm serious, and I have a lot of banter, and we have a lot of Mickey taking, and I laugh a lot, and I keep being called a blokey bloke, but I take that confidentiality seriously. I take that role seriously, and the honour to be able to do it. And it's like anything in life. There's some people there that use you a lot, and there's some people that say hello and they'll never use you in their lifetime. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like anywhere, any workplace. You know, there'll be some people that you're closer to and others that you're not closer to. I have to say, everybody at West Ham, even the ones that don't necessarily come and would want my services, as it were, would want any support, are all polite and say hello. It's a very family. I wouldn't say it's family run. I'd say it's very family orientated club in the sense of everyone feels welcome there. That it's a family environment. And in terms of supporters, you know, it's been strange a few times where I've been at the games and I might have my jacket on that's got Rev on it, and I'm getting a bit more publicity in the programme these days than the previous chaplains did. So, did a big write up at the Easter double page spread of an Easter message, so people recognise me a bit more now than they used to, and that's nice. That's lovely to have. But it's very much West Ham way. It's very much like, you know, you're one of us type thing.
If we can talk about, for example, this season, do you find that the performance of the club on the pitch impacts you in any way whatsoever?
Well, it does as a fan, that's for sure. It absolutely does as a fan. I'm no different to anybody that pays their money to go and watch the team. The only difference is I know those people. So it affects me in two ways. It affects me because I'm a fan and I can see, obviously, I want us to win and do well and, you know, climb the table, etc., win cups, and like any fan does. You know, I want us to see play good football. But the other side of me also knows that, you know, so and so who's playing is having a bad game. It could be because of something happening at home, or it could be because he's had a barney with so and so. So, and also you think to yourself, especially with the coaching staff and the staff of the club rather than the players, because you know them and you know their families, you think to yourself, you have a different perspective on, you know, if we lose, what's the consequences to them and their families? So it's a double-sided coin.
I think it's really important as well to, you highlighted it there a bit, is the humanity of players, because being a football player is clearly a very pressurized environment. And I feel like that's changed also because opinions on their performances are immediate and unfettered. Anyone can direct anything at them. And I'm interested to know, you know, the psychology of the players and how you might support them through a difficult period if they're having a hard time on the pitch.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In terms of players, it's quite difficult because even though I have a lot of access to the players and I'll have breakfast with them and chat, some of them are very young and they don't necessarily want to open up and talk. Some might be sort of persuaded or directed by agents and stuff. So to get in there and have a really deep conversation with them or for them to open up, but like anything, it's about trust, and that takes time to build up. But unfortunately, in football, with some players, you might get a lot of time to have them trust build up, and others they come and go. So, and you can't build that trust in that time. I remember saying to David Moyes when he was at West Ham on one occasion, I used to have quite a lot of conversations with David Moyes. He's a lovely guy. He always gave me time, and we got into a lot of conversations, and we would talk lots about his family and about stuff that was going on in his life outside of football. But I said to him on one occasion that, you know, your industry, there's no other job in the world where on a Saturday afternoon 65,000 people can do your job better than you. How do you manage that? How do you cope with that? I suppose there's slight similarities in being a vicar of a church. Like I'm not a vicar of a church, but I'm a priest. But I'm not, you know, some of my peers and colleagues and friends of mine often say that, you know, the congregation think that they can do the job better than them. But in football, we make it vocal. You know, fans make it vocal, and that's quite hard for managers to do. And I think, I mean, one of the things David Moyes came back to me with when I asked him that question was, you know, so he struggles with social media because social media can be, it doesn't just affect your performance, it affects your family, and you know it's the nasty side and the negative side of the beautiful game.
Yeah, because there's very much an opinion, isn't there, of, oh, I'm sure they're crying into their millions, etc.
Yeah.
But, you know, these people are very real people, and irregardless of how much money is in the bank, you're going to feel the challenges that may arise. In your Easter message, you talked about marrying negative emotions and positive emotions in life. You suggested that let those emotions coexist, and that way we can sort of fully live in God's world and God's presence. And that feels particularly pertinent relating to football for me because football, and it happens a lot quicker than a lot of other times in life where it's like 2 weeks ago, you might think, oh, West Ham, I think we're going to stay up here. And then all it will take is a couple of results for it to change completely. And that's a real roller coaster to sort of sit upon. And yeah, I guess I'm just intrigued as to how you might navigate that because,
Good question.
I've never had to deal with that change of emotions. And I think the same thing would occur in hospital as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I mean, that quote came from a TV program that I used to watch called This Is Us, which was an amazing American program about life. And this couple had lost a baby and they'd gone back to the doctor many years later. And it was the doctor that was talking about it. And life is like that, isn't it? On one minute, and the hospital is a prime example of that. There'll be people in the hospital celebrating because they've just had a baby and it's all wonderful and it's beautiful. And they'll be in the corridor next door. There's families leaving there crying their eyes out because they've just lost a loved one. And it's how you balance that. And life's like that, isn't it? None of us go through life without any sadness, issues, or scars. And none of us go through life where we never have any happiness or we never have any joy. Sometimes it might be harder to find, but it's there. I have a saying at work, especially within a hospital setting, but you can relate it to football as well. I have a saying that is called, "You got to find the moments of beauty within the trauma." I genuinely believe that within every trauma and traumatic event, there's moments of beauty. In a healthcare setting, it might be that within the coma, someone squeezes the hand. In my own father's case, when my father died in hospital 11 years ago now, it was the way that the doctor came down and held his hand and knelt down next to him, or the way that the healthcare assistant just put her arm around him. It's little things like the moments of beauty within the trauma. But we have that, but that's life. We have to manage that. And the skill of life, none of us have got the answer to it, definitely not me, is how you don't let one overtake the other. And we do. Sometimes we'll be fed up, depressed, and it's hard to get that mojo back, or it's hard to see anything positive in life or whatever. And then sometimes when you're sailing on the crest of the wave, it's hard to imagine. The way I describe it, sometimes, when it's absolutely scorching hot, it could be 30 degrees and it's scorching hot. It's hard to imagine how cold the snow is, isn't it? It's hard to imagine it being really cold. It's a bit like that. You have to it's a seesaw, isn't it? You have to get that balance. I don't know the answer to it. That's life. That's life. But when faced with stuff like that, with players or coaching staff or supporters, I often say, well, you need to find the moment of beauty within the trauma.
Which is incredibly profound because football and life and
Yeah,
everything is both beautiful and
yeah.
very hard. Speaking of supporters, I'm often interested how you might minister to someone who's from a secular background, because I've often found that actually prayer is a great source of comfort for someone, even if they don't have any sort of religious beliefs. And is it something you offer, or is it just if it happens organically, then you might offer spiritual
Yeah,
advice?
they're both really. It depends on the situation. I sometimes get people stop me and say, "Will you say a prayer for me?" That happens. Happens at work. It happens at football, or it tends to happen organically in the situation. So if I think it's appropriate, I will say, "Oh, I'm going to hold you in my prayers," or "Would you like me to say a prayer for you?" If I know them and it's a relationship based, it's slightly easier. I can gauge that better. But for a supporter, like I had some telephone conversations with supporters recently who had written into the club because they'd lost somebody and they wanted the club to send them a flag for the funeral, for the coffin and stuff like that. And I contacted them and spoke to them. And you just let them pour their heart out and listen to their grief and hold their grief for a while. And at the end of those conversations, I said, "Would you like me to say a prayer for you in the chapel today when I go back to the chapel?" And they said yes. And that sometimes you don't say that because you just sense that's not the right thing to say. So you have to think on your feet. It's like any form of ministry to some extent. You have to think on your feet. And I suppose the difference being between my role as a chaplain, and this is the same in the hospital as it is in the football club, compared to a parochial minister, and a parochial minister is a guy or a woman or a man that runs a church in the community, is my role isn't to convert. My role isn't to proselytize and get you to become a Christian or whatever other faith you want to become. My role is to help you develop to become the best person you can be. That's how I see it. My job isn't to get you into my church. Where if I was a parish priest, just by nature of that job, my role is to nurture your soul. Okay. And you come to me. I'm going to try and get you to come to my church or whatever it is. My job's the opposite to that. My job isn't to proselytize. My job is to go to you where you are at. So my job is to get alongside the fan, the player, the coaching staff, the receptionist, the kit man, the woman that serves coffee, get alongside where they are at and help them and support them in that position. And if the opportunity to minister comes out of that, great. I mean, I walk in there with a dog collar on so they know where I'm coming from. Some ask what's that mean, especially if they're international players, they might not have an understanding of that. But my role is very different. And it's the same in the hospital. You know, we go to the best bedside, and a lot of the time we don't talk about God or pray or anything. I'm talking about, how they're doing and where they grew up and what they did for a job, and all that sort of stuff. And then once you build those relationships, then you can start to ask the questions. So, how are you coping today? How are you feeling? How are you coping with this illness? How are you coping with it? I asked a couple of players fairly recently, beginning of the year, how are you coping knowing that you're going to be leaving? Sort of stuff. They're real life decisions. They're real life issues.
I was wondering if we could just sort of take a little walk through your faith journey. And I'm particularly interested because I grew up in a secular environment. It was still Christian, if you know what I mean. We got
Yeah,
christened, we went to church at Christmas, we did all the
yeah.
traditional things. So I was just wondering about your journey into faith and what it was at the age of 16 that sparked your interest in maybe giving your life over to God.
So at the age of 16, I was going to a youth club at the YMCA, and I started going out with this girl whose dad ran an event at a big Christian festival called Greenbelt. And at that time in 1985, Greenbelt, there wasn't as many festivals in the country at that time. You had Glastonbury and one or two others. You had the Isle of Wight and places like that, but you didn't have many other big festivals. And Greenbelt was getting about 35,000 people go to this festival. And a guy, my girlfriend's dad at the time, who was the youth worker at the YMCA, was a guy called Pip Wilson. He took me and a few other friends along to this festival. And he ran a show there called the Rolling Magazine Roadshow. And it was a cross between a Radio 1 style roadshow and what I would call TFI Friday. It was like a mix of interviewing people, live bands on stage, but also lots of interaction with the audience, lots of messy games with the audience and all that sort of stuff. And I fell in love with it. And on the Sunday morning, we went to the Sunday service, which was full. It was at the main stage, and all 35,000 people were there. And my only experience of church before that was in the Cubs and Scouts, where you used to have to go once a month, and I hated it. In fact, I left the Scouts because I was bullied, and I didn't like the church side of it. I didn't. It was boring, and I was bullied in the Scouts and didn't like it, so I left. But at this festival, and I saw 35,000 people all singing and dancing, and it wasn't like a boring church service. It was like a rock concert. It was incredible. And I even remember the songs they played, which were really cheesy 80s Christian songs. Shine, Jesus, Shine, Lord of the Dance, stuff like that. But the atmosphere was incredible. And I was walking back to our tent about 12:30 on the Sunday lunchtime. And going alongside that, one of my dad's best friends, a guy called Dave Dyer, was seriously ill. He'd had a rare form of cancer, bone cancer, and he was extremely ill. So, I knew he was extremely ill, and I'd seen the guy being really athletic, top footballer and table tennis player. To he'd shrunk, and last time I saw him, he was like an old man, shriveled up. Horrible to see. I was walking back to the tent, and I turned and I said to my friend who I was with, "My dad's mate Dave's just died, but 35,000 people can't be wrong. He's gone to a better place." And I felt totally at peace about it. And I forgot all about it. We carried on the rest of the afternoon, didn't think anything of it. And this is before mobile phones and stuff like that. And I got home on the Tuesday morning, and my mum and dad were there, and they told me that Dave had died at 12:30 on the Sunday. And I said, "I know, I just felt it." And that was the start, really, then, of me going to see the youth worker Pip, my girlfriend's dad, who was a Christian, strong Christian guy, and exploring the journey of faith, really. And I can't really say there was a day that I became a Christian. I think it started then and has been continuing to grow ever since. It's continued to, and it's still growing and developing now. Even though I'm ordained, I don't know the answers. I'm the most untheological trained person. Don't tell the college who trained me and ordained me, but I'm rubbish at. This is a true story. I actually I went with the children's ward. I went to a pub quiz one Christmas a few years back, and one of the rounds was on religion, and I only got one question out of 10 right. The stick I got from that, you can imagine, because that side of it doesn't. To me, it's about a relationship with God. It's about a relationship with God. People say, "Are you religious?" And I say, "No, I'm a Christian." To me, it's about a relationship with Jesus and God. And as I get older, that's developing. I don't preach very often at church, and in fact, I don't have a lot of time to go to church. I'm always at the hospital or looking after my daughter. But so I don't often go. But when I do go, I love it. But I was talking at church the other week, and I came across. I'm always late to the party at things, and I came across a program called The Chosen, which is on Prime, and the guy that plays Jesus in that is the closest thing I can see to Jesus, and it's really inspired me. And I've learnt more from that TV series than I did from a lot of the theological lectures that I went to. But don't tell St. Malachus College that. But it's my faith grows and it's a journey, and it started when I was 16. My parents both became Christian round about the same sort of time. They started going to church before me actually, but then that was a strange way. My mum and dad in 1983, my granddad died, and a half hour later, my uncle died on my mum's side of the family. So my granddad on my dad's dad died, and a half hour later, my mum's uncle died. So my family got to know the undertakers extremely well. And the undertaker was a Christian guy, and he invited them to church after the funeral. So they started going to church then. But then they dropped off for a while. But after I became a sort of Christian, around about the age of 16 onwards, and when I became an adult and got married, they then started to go to the same church that I started to go to. But sadly, they're no longer with us anymore.
Well, my condolences to you on that, but a really lovely statement of how it all came together. I always ask this question, and it's a sort of question that stumps a lot of people, and it's particularly amusing given your quiz story. But I often ask, is there any particular part of scripture or a quote that you particularly like? But yeah, no worries if you'd rather skip over that.
The one that always comes out to me is Psalm 23, because one, I use it a lot at work in a lot of funerals, but two, I love the thought of that even when you walk through the darkest valley, fear no evil, I am with you. Your rod, my rod and your staff are your comfort. So that to me is what I see. To me, that's faith. That's faith. That would be my favourite passage. Oh, and also Deuteronomy 14, it talks about spend your money wisely, spend it on real beer and ale. So, I often quote that one when people say to me, "You shouldn't be drinking." Well, actually, first miracle, he turned water into wine. And if you go to Deuteronomy 14, yeah, see what that says.
You could hold the pint up and just say Bible approved.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
okay.
exactly that. Yeah,
So it's one thing being a Christian, obviously. It's another finding your way into ordained ministry. So
yeah,
I've just wondered, what was that a particular moment, or was that just sort of like, all right,
yeah. That
I'll
was
start doing this?
no, that was significantly a God moment. That was. I thought I was going to be in the YMCA for life. I thought I would end up being a chief executive or CEO of a YMCA because I've grown up in it. My mum and dad were volunteers in it. The chapel at Romford YMCA is named after my family. I thought that was going to be my career. A bit like a stick of rock. You snap me in half, I had YMCA written through me. And then in 2006, we had a serious incident in the hostel that I was the manager of. Two residents killed another resident. It made the news, it made the headlines. And that was the start of a downfall of me in my management position. And then about 9 months later, or 6 months later, I was burnt out. I was absolutely exhausted. I wasn't very good at the job, if I'm honest. I was good at youth work, fantastic at youth work, but housing management is very different to youth work. And in the YMCA, a lot of youth workers ended up going into housing because they had hostels attached to them. So just by default, you would end up going into them. And these days, you have to do degrees in housing law and housing and get qualifications. I didn't have any of that. I had a youth work diploma. So I was struggling, really struggling. And then I met up with the CEO, who was extremely supportive and still a very good friend of mine. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And we found a way out. But I had sort of that feeling of not knowing what I wanted to do now, or not knowing what I was going to do next in my life. Ordination was nowhere near. nothing on the radar. I went to church every Sunday. I was married at the time. I'm divorced now, but I was married at the time, and that was our local church. But as part of a job, no, never crossed my mind. And I woke up one morning and I thought, I'm going to prove to the YMCA I can do that housing job. I'm going to go and get the biggest housing job I can find. Right? This is true. And I got the Guardian paper and I applied for a housing director for a housing association in Islington, Highbury in Islington. And it was mega money, 3 times the amount of money that I was on at the YMCA. So I applied for it, got an interview, and it was a 2-day interview process. And at the back of my mind, I really didn't want the job. I thought, what I'm doing this to prove something. That's what I'm doing. You don't really want to be in housing. Why are you doing this? The money was flashing lights in my eyes. I needed the money at the time. So I went to this interview and it was right round the corner next door to the old Highbury. The old Highbury Stadium was being knocked down at that moment in time. So at the end, it was a 2-day interview, and I knew I couldn't make the second day. So after the first interview, there's the CEO, who was a woman, and 2 other people next to her, saying, and they're putting their stuff in their bags. Saying, "Did you get here okay? Did you find it okay?" And all the polite things you say at the end of an interview. So as I'm putting my coat on, I went, "Yeah, I did, but I was sick when I got round the corner." And this is true. They all stopped doing what they're doing. They said, "Are you okay now?" And I went, yeah. I said, I came out the station, I walked round the corner and there was Highbury. I'm a West Ham fan, so I threw up, right? And one of the guys laughed and he said, "Oh, I'm a Liverpool fan." And we started talking about football. Then I said, "I'm really sorry, but I can't make the second interview." Okay. And I honestly thought they would just say, "Thanks for coming, goodbye." I got back home and about 9 o'clock that night, they rang me to say, "We've changed the date of the second interview. Can you come?" Now I can't say no. So I went along and I did this presentation all about key performance indicators. And I used the Football League and I sort of eyeballed the guy that I knew was a Liverpool fan. And I've done something, Graham, I've never done before and I'll never do again. At the end of this interview, I really didn't really want the job. They said to me, "Have you got any questions?" And I went, "Yeah, I have actually. You tell me one reason each, if I'm successful, why I should come and work with you." Right? Blew them away. Blew them away. Offered me the job. So I started work. Within day one, I thought, what am I doing here? I have no idea what I'm doing here. I lasted the probation period, which was 6 months. Then they extended it by another 3 months. And at the end of those 9 months, I thought, I just can't do this. I've done this all for the wrong reasons. During that time, I walked into church and said to my vicar, this is before I started at the Housing Association, "Does anybody need visiting in hospital because I've got time on my hands?" And he went, no, there isn't. But funny you should say that. An email came in yesterday from the hospital. They're looking for people to train as chaplaincy volunteers. So I did this training course alongside applying for this housing job. And then once I got the housing job, I did this part-time training course to become a chaplaincy volunteer. So I started volunteering at Queen's Hospital in the critical care areas as a volunteer chaplain and fell in love with it. So when the 9 months came up at the Housing Association, I was like, no, my heart is in chaplaincy. God has put this in my heart. My heart is now in chaplaincy. So we ended in mutual partnership. We ended leaving the Housing Association, which was, it was a cathartic experience because the CEO took me out on my last night with a team of people. And I said to her, "You must be kicking yourself because now you've got to go through the whole recruitment process again. And that's not cheap, to advertise in The Guardian, etc." And that wasn't advertised online as much in those days. And she said to me, and this is what I needed to hear because I'd had such a bad ending in the YMCA. She said, "You're joking, Phil. You've brought more in 9 months to my management team than most of them have done in 9 years. It's just the wrong job for you. If I had a different job I could slot you into, I would." And I needed to hear that confidence and that building up. I needed to hear that. But my heart was in the hospital. My heart was in chaplaincy, and it made sense to me. It just everything seemed to align and fit into place. So then I had to work out how then do I make that into a job? And that was a process that took several years. When I knew that I wanted to be a hospital chaplain, I then was advised by the guy who was the chaplain at the hospital at the time, who trained me. There was two of them. He said, go and speak to other hospital chaplains around the country and find out how they got into it, because the traditional route was to be ordained. Most people were leaving the church because they were elderly, retiring, etc., and then going into chaplaincy or other forms of ministry like that. I didn't have that. I was coming at it from a completely. I was about 38 years of age at the time, and I was coming at it from a completely different route. And one of the guys, it was the lead chaplain, who I'm still friends with. He was a lead chaplain at Adam Brooks in Cambridge. He said to me, no matter what you do, you should really do some training. And there's two modules of an MA course that you can do, which is specifically around chaplaincy. So I applied for that, and I ended up doing the whole MA, Masters in Pastoral Theology. And it was during that time I then was able to build up some enough experience, and I applied for a job in Romford where I was being a volunteer. Didn't get it the first time round, got it the second time round. So I started as a non-ordained lay chaplain, and I worked my way up. And after about a year and a bit, I thought, if I'm going to do this properly, I feel like I should be a lead chaplain. I feel like I should be managing the service. That's where I feel God's going. I should be ordained. And then I explored the ordination process through the Church of England, through my home church in Cranham at the time, St Luke's. And I did it part-time whilst I was doing the work.
And so, your curacy, for example, did that involve the usual things like preaching and
Yeah,
working
yeah, yeah.
through the
So what
church?
so what happened was I went through the route called self-supporting minister, because I knew that the church, I knew I was going to stay being a hospital chaplain at the end of it. So the church weren't going to pay me. So I'm employed by the NHS. So you have a bit more control in where you go and what you do when you're in that situation. So I did my curacy at my home church. Yeah, I did services and did all that sort of stuff. But a lot of it, the vicar at the time, he's since retired, and there's a new vicar there now. But the vicar at the time was very much, well, you do a lot of this stuff in your day job at the hospital. We can tick it off and tick that box there and all that sort of stuff. So we worked it together. But yeah, I did, did all your usual, service taking and all that sort of stuff.
Are you able to share a moment where you feel like your faith has carried you and God has been walking with you in your life?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like most people, it's when you look back, you realise God was carrying. I mean, at that moment of me walking into church and saying, "Does anyone need visiting in hospital?" That was a God moment. The fact that, someone once said to me, and this was a God moment, that, that they said to me, for you to leave the YMCA would have taken something big. And it was something big. It was life changing. It was heartbreaking. It was almost mentally did me in. But the other side of that, the moments of beauty within the trauma, what came out of that was a completely different feel right. It was a completely different way of life. Not a way of life, but a way forward in life. I've always been me in that sense, but a new career, and a career and a job, it just feels like, well, it doesn't even feel like a job. It just feels like I'm just being me. I'm just doing what I should be doing. So God's definitely carried me through those moments. And being a youth worker, I was a youth worker in some tough situations. I spent 4 years in Chelmsford Prison working with young offenders. I had some tough moments in there. I used to work in with alcoholics in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, where I lived for a while. I've seen a lot of violence, been around a lot of violence in a work setting, not in a private setting, in a work setting. But I'm one of these ones that never at the time see God in it. It's only after. I'll tell you, this is true. This is quite ironic. This is today, funny enough. I was driving back from visiting an ex-player to talk about the funeral, and I had to ring my ex-wife because she sent me an urgent text. And I'm very close to my ex-wife. We're good friends. We've got a daughter together who's autistic, and we both co-parent very well. And I did a memorial for a friend of mine yesterday for his mum. His mum died in December. We did a quick funeral. Then they went to New Zealand for 3 months. So we did a memorial yesterday. And the guy who I did the memorial for died last night, just suddenly died last night. So I'm driving home this lunchtime today, knowing I'm coming to do this, thinking, where is God now? And I'm like any other person and any other bloke, where is God now? Where is God in this? Because I can't see it. I don't feel it. I don't see it. I just have to believe he's there. And I say this to a lot of people. And I say this when I do funerals a lot sometimes, It makes no sense to me. You know, I've done funerals of all ages, but did a funeral of a 7-year-old a few years back who got killed in Harold Wood, got electrocuted. Got to know the family extremely well. I was there in the hospital the night he came in, and you journey with them. You journey with them, and that never leaves you, and it will never leave them. And I said at that funeral, you know, the God that makes no sense to me as a dad. This makes no sense to me as a Christian. This makes no sense to me as a chaplain, as a priest. This makes no sense to me. But I have to believe God is there to help us get through these moments in time. And in that situation, I said, if you don't believe the God I believe in is a God of love, and if you don't believe that, look around the room now because the room is full of love. Yeah, yeah, I have to believe in a God of love. And I do believe there's a great book by a rabbi called Harold Kushner called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? I do believe, and I do believe God guides us in stuff, but I don't believe in a God that goes around saying, right, well, you're going to win the lottery, you're going to die in a car accident, you're going to die at 84, you're going to get cancer, you're not going to get cancer, you'll be rich, you'll be poor. We live in a bad world, a broken world where bad things happen to good people. But I do believe God is there to help us get through those moments in time. So, I'm carrying that as we speak, really. And like everybody else, I question it. You know, if the question you asked about the Bible reading, the better question would be, which disciple do you connect with the most? It's Thomas for me, doubting Thomas, every day, every single day. Yeah.
Beautifully put. And you've also given me a new question to ask, so very appreciative of that as well. Is there any moment within your time as an ordained minister and as a chaplain that you're particularly proud of that you can think of?
I think in terms of chaplaincy at the football club, there isn't any individual moment. There's been lots of special moments, I have to say. During COVID, one of the kit men for the academy, a guy called Tony Falco, fantastic guy, absolute great guy, been at the club for a long while, loved by everybody. He got COVID, and he almost died. He was touch and go at one point, and I became the link between the football club and him, but also between him and his family because they couldn't visit. So I was getting his family call me every day, asking how he was and doing stuff, and I was calling them, and also the football club. And I suppose that process, and thanks to God that Tony pulled through, and he's as right as rain now, mad as a hatter, but as right as rain. He it was that really cemented, I think, the understanding of what a chaplain does in a football club. It's about being there for people. So that's one example. I mean, there's loads of little moments and examples where I've been really proud. I mean, walking out the last remembrance service that we had at the stadium, I walked out on the pitch side with the army and a charity. That was a proud moment. Standing on the middle of the pitch with David Gold's family, that was a very proud moment. In terms of the hospital stuff, sometimes it's the simplest things that make me the proudest. It's literally being there and holding the hand of somebody and just holding their suffering for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Yeah, which is an honour and a privilege to do. That makes me very proud. Very proud.
Beautifully put. This is the section at the end, sir, where which I call any other business. This is your moment. I don't know if you wish to promote anything. You can do what you like with this moment. Just anything you may like to add.
No, this has been a fantastic opportunity, Graham. I've loved it. I've loved every minute of it. It's been great to talk about stuff and also talk about my life in a sense that I don't often get to chat about, really. I went round after COVID. I started doing a bit of a tour of churches talking about what it was like to be a chaplain during COVID. And that's a different podcast, but that was, and I often talk about the book by Charlie Mackesy, the boy, I can never get the name right, the boy, the fox, the mole, and the horse. I'll never get them in the right order. But what a book that is. There's a page at the end of it that says the boy is on the back of the horse and they're looking out over this mountain range, and the boy says, "God, we've still got so far to go." And the horse turns around and says, "Yeah, but look how far we've come." And I think that's amazing. I think that's just a beautiful sentence. So, yeah, I recommend to people to go and buy that book. It's helped me a lot, that book.
Excellent stuff. I was hoping you might drift into your world of film and TV
Ah,
as well. I
that's
feel
a
like that's
bygone
worth
past. Yeah. 'Cause you've done
I'm
your own work,
sorry.
haven't you?
Yeah, oh, yeah, no, absolutely. You've given
You've
me,
done your own work. Yeah.
you've donated your time to me, sir. It's up to me to do my homework and respect that.
Yeah, I did, it was all through Greenbelt really, that festival, and the show that the Rolling magazine that Pip Wilson, that, you know, my at that time, my girlfriend's dad used to run. I then took over it from him when he retired from it, and I did it for about 10 years on my own as the compere and the host. And, when I was a kid growing up, I wanted to be one of 2 things. And I remember going to I was about 13, and I went to my careers officer at school. You're only given 5 minutes in those days. And, I said she said, "What do you wanna be?" And I said, "Well, I wanna either be a youth worker or an entertainer. I wanna be the next Bruce Forsyth or Shane Ritchie." And she had no idea what to do with me with that one. She just sent me away. But I started doing a lot of comparing and presenting, and then in about 1997, well, in fact, funny enough, I was offered the job as I always wanted to be a blue coat or a red coat, and I thought that would be my way of getting into the entertainment business. And at the age of 21, I was offered. I went to an audition for Pontins to be a blue coat, and it was the Golden. It was a nightclub in Tottenham Court Road at the time called the Golden Nugget nightclub. And I walked in. It was a Friday morning, and I walked in there and I was interviewed. And I was doing lots of youth work stuff and lots of kids groups and stuff like that within the YMCA. And they said, "Yeah, great, we'd love to have you." They said, "You're a couple of years older than most people there. Most people are 18. You're 21. We'll give you a supervisor role, sports supervisor during the day. Let us know on Monday if you want to do it." It's down in, I think it was down in Devon. I think this is a God moment. I just come. This is a God moment, right? To answer your question previously, I walked out of there on that Friday morning, and every bit of ambition to be an entertainer had left me. It'd gone. I didn't want it. And I got home back to Rush Green, and Mum and Dad said, "How'd you get on?" I said, "Yeah, they offered me the job. I got on them on Monday." They were all like really excited. I said, "Yeah, but I don't want it." She said, "Why? What's the matter?" I said, "Well, it just don't feel right. Just don't. It's all gone. The ambition's gone." And on the Saturday morning, I'm not making this up, on the Saturday morning, a letter arrived from the YMCA National Youth Work College to say I'd been accepted on the youth work course. And I did that. So I trained as a youth worker, was doing youth work. And then in 97, I thought, "Oh, I wish I had done that now. I wish I could do it." So I bought the Stage newspaper, which was a theatrical newspaper on a Thursday. And in it was an advert that said, "Do you want to be in acting and modelling for real?" And I rang it, and I thought, "This is gonna cost me a fortune. This is gonna be a swindle or something." And I rang it, and this guy, I'll never forget this, Graham, as long as I live, this guy answered the phone, and his name was Hervé James. I've tried to track him down since, I can't find him. Hervé James. And he said, "So tell me a bit about yourself." And I told him that, I'd done lots of presenting, lots of live presenting with audiences, comparing festivals and shows like that. Didn't do it. I've done a bit of amateur dramatic acting, but not anything. Did a little bit of modelling, but not massively. More for sort of like Christian magazines and stuff like that, and a couple of charity fashion shows and stuff. And he turned around and he said, "Right, I want you to buy my book." And I'm thinking, "Oh, here we go. It's going to cost me 300 quid." And he said, "It's 9.99." So I bought this book, and he ran a company called Swan Productions. And he said, "Once you've read the book, at the back of the book, it tells you what to do next." And this book was called Acting and Modelling for Real with No Experience. Well, it changed my life, because the opening paragraph was, most people that do the lottery turn around and say, "If I win the lottery, it's not going to change me." Well, then why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? You're doing it to change your life. And this book was all about giving yourself short goals to achieve stuff, but something in your life has to change, because if you don't change it, it would have happened already. So you need to change something in your life. So I read this book, and it was really easy to read. And at the back of it, it said, "Your next stage is, if you'd like to take this further, go on one of our 1 day courses." And they were about 50 quid. So I went to Kent on this 1 day course, and you had to take with you a reel of film. This is before digital cameras, a reel of film, black and white film. And this guy, Hervé James, he took it and he talked about how to get into acting and TV extra work. And he literally gave you what to do. And from that, I got 4 agents as an extra. And my first job was on the bill, which was like the bread and butter for most. They call them supporting artists nowadays, but they were called extras when I did it. And I did the bill at least 20 times, at least 20 times. And that was the start of it. I loved it. And it wasn't my main job. It was, and what was quite interesting is I learnt very quickly I wasn't going to become famous or, an entertainer through doing that. But I enjoyed doing it. It was a complete contrast to my day job. And I met some really fascinating people. So the last job I ever did, and I did things like Gimme, Gimme, Gimme with Kathy Burke, Jonathan Creek. I was in the first Addy G film in the Addy G in the house. I played his press photographer. Never really had any speaking. Had a couple of sort of minor acting things, but nothing really major. Never really chased it or pursued it. I wasn't one of these ones that used to ring my agent every day. I just let them ring me because I was too busy with the YMCA work. But it was a great thing to do. My last job actually was a Tesco's commercial for their Tesco's insurance, and I had to drive this Ford Mondeo around a car park several times in Croydon. One of my highlights actually was I had to play a football hooligan, and I had to go to Crystal Palace Football Club into their car park and turn over a Ford Sierra and set fire to it. That was great fun. Great fun. Yeah,
The contrast is just
yeah,
wild there.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. That's absolutely
Oh, how do we get
brilliant.
on to that? Sorry.
No, no, I enjoy it. I love it. I love it. Well,
Um,
on that note, it's been a real privilege to talk to you, Phil.
and you,
I've
mate.
really enjoyed it. So thank you ever so much for giving me your time today.
Pleasure. Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime. Yeah, I should have mentioned actually Sports Chaplaincy UK, who I affiliate to. They code of conduct and all that sort of stuff. They've done some training with us, and they're a great organisation that I'm a part of.
So, if you wish to find out a little bit more, you can find Sports Chaplaincy online. Do head over to Saturday Service Football on Instagram and Facebook and at Faith and Footy on X, or visit livestreams.org.uk to hear about my church. Yeah, Philip, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.